Gut, okay. Aber ich kann vielleicht auch ab und zu mal einen Satz in den Raum werfen. Einfach in den Vortrag hinein, oder du vielleicht auch, und dann kriegen wir dadurch ein bisschen was, die Leute am roten Faden halten. Ja. Ja. Alles länger dauert.
Talking on the subject of future energy programs and initiatives into emerging energy, propulsion, and bioenergy. I'm Tom Valone from the Integrity Research Institute. So I thought I'd give you a little bit of overview in the presentation here. And it looks like I'm going to be using the forwarding computer. Yes. Well, no, it's not plugged in. That's right. Okay, so as I'm filling in for the plugging in of the remote, I'd like to point out that the phrase future energy has been found in a lot of different publications and conferences. Popular Science, for example, has a special issue on this topic, and I was pleased to see that they include things like petroleum-fueled molten salt reactors, which is actually a very safe method for using nuclear power in terms of generating electricity. And also they do cover a little bit about fusion energy, space-based power, solar power. And I don't know if anybody knows, but the Japanese are committed to producing space-based solar power within 10 years. So we have a speaker actually describing that, Paul Werbles from the National Science Foundation. And it's interesting that even though we pioneered some of the theory, you find foreign countries taking the ball and running with it. And that's true with space-based power. The reason you want to put a solar panel up in space, just to put it briefly, is you get 10 times the power out of it than you do in domestic, going through atmosphere, clouds, and atmosphere. And of course, biogas as well. And the fascinating part about the future generation, the future energy, is the important part about the goals that we have as an institute, and that is expanding new energy discoveries, developing new propulsion systems, and creating optimum health with bioenergy and bioenergetics. Some of the websites you can visit are futureenergy.org and also bioenergydevice.org, as well as our institute name.org. And it looks like we're going to just quickly want to cover. We also have had lots of conferences on future energy. The one that we had here was number 2, and we featured for the first time, a panel of zero-point energy experts. This is a privilege to have literally everyone in the panel, except for one who was an investor, to talk on that subject briefly, and then we had, of course, a discussion on it. We also had a fusion panel discussion as well at the same conference. So we try to pioneer energy innovations and also get dialogue going between the public and the experts that obviously are present at these conferences. And here's our executive director showing off all the publications that we have in Civic Boots. And this is a collage showing the first Conference on Future Energy that we had in 1999. It was scheduled for the U.S. State Department for a full year. I was invited to do so from the secretary of the Open Forum. It was the Secretary's Open Forum that hosted the conference. And until it got to a couple months before the scheduled date, we had all the doors open, and it actually was called the Conference on Clean Energy. And that was a mistake on my part. Because once the public media finds out about something called free energy, it became labeled pseudoscience. And so I got attacked from a professor from the University of Maryland who also was a spokesperson for the American Physical Society. And he decided to blast us every week for a while to make sure that the agency I worked for, the Commerce Department, was sufficiently embarrassed to get me fired, which he did by the end of August. So I had only a couple months left in my job, unbeknownst to myself. But the interesting thing was, as I suffered the demise and I had to move this conference to a hotel, it turns out that one of the directors at the patent office decided that the whole conference I had designed was actually a good idea. And so he designed what he called the tech fairs, technology fairs that started the very next year in 2000 and continues really to this day, every single year, inviting outside inventors and industrial experts to give technology lectures at the patent office. Because I found that before that, there never was outside lectures. So we find agencies working that way, in isolation, trying to make technical decisions. And of course, these conferences were designed to be an exposure to the outside reality. And so it caught on. 10 years later, you see lots of different countries having future energy seminars and conferences as well. Of course, they're better organized than some of ours, but the nice thing is that the phrase and the concept became very popular. And for good reason, in a way, as we pursue the energy propulsion and bioenergy programs, we find that there's a lot of projects that can fall within the ranges of those three main topics. And when you look at the human race and the human condition, I believe that energy propulsion and bioenergetics are perhaps the most important areas we need to fix and correct and innovate to be able to ensure we have posterity. So some of the electromagnetic devices are actually built. Some of the other topics in energy propulsion have also been discussed at various presentations. And this particular graph is a copy of the Google universe. It was inspired by Google. And we decided to put our projects in a graph that shows the cost involved and also the percent development. And what's nice about it is this was designed just about a year ago, and already some of the projects have moved from 40% all the way to 100%, and we've gotten literally off the graph. So we're happy to say this is a dynamic picture of all the different projects that we've been involved in. Most of the projects, I should say. And in the bioenergetics program area, we have been pursuing the energy medicine projects. And one of the books that can be used to see how this theory works and what the journal articles are that correspond to the reality that we're investigating is the bioelectromagnetic healing, just that I edited. The exciting thing that I can share with you is the fact of the transmembrane potential. Probably one of the most important findings that was described in the book is that across every cell membrane, there's a very high voltage. And it's comparatively high because what we do is compare it in terms of volts per meter. And actually on the next graph I'll be showing the actual numbers. The other important finding is the fact that electrons are the actual ingredients of antioxidants. So when you look at hemp devices or microcurrent devices or even high voltage devices, all of them are sharing electrons with you directly. So when you think about the free radical damage that a lot of aging, you can see free radical damage in people's faces. Literally wrinkles are a sign of free radical damage. So if you're exposed to electrons each day, you can help your body quench those free radicals before they do the damage. That's really a chain reaction. And that's the exciting part too. The other thing I should share with you too is the body stores energy in only two ways: electrical gradients or chemical gradients. And of course, in the West, you know which one has been dominant. Pharmaceuticals are experts in the one on the right side, and sort of ignore the other one. So as I emphasized just that one concept, electrons being antioxidants, we're concerned with the free radicals that are stealing them and to create more. For example, if you shower without a shower filter, there's some very nice ones Amazon sells for only $20 some, and they create vitamin C directly from the chlorine that's in your municipal water as you bathe in the shower. Now, if you don't, I don't know if there's anyone that doesn't shower without a shower filter. A lot of us do in hotels, of course. The organic textbook I consulted on this subject says that chlorine Cl2 molecule dissociates at, guess what temperature? Body temperature. So you're literally getting CO2 out of the spigot from the shower, and as soon as it hits your body, or if you have hot water, nobody showers with hot water, do they? Well, if you do, you're helping the chlorine to dissociate to the Cl-, which is a free radical, your body absorbs it. And I can share with you another story to prove how radical and active, reactive chlorine is. Years ago, a fellow came to my house to sell me a water filter just for the kitchen faucet. And what he did is he said, fill up the glass with some water from your faucet, and I'll put a couple drops in the water and turn it yellow. So I said, okay, that's supposed to be a proof there's chlorine in that water that came from my city municipal supply. So I poured it out, filled up the water glass again, and he says, put your finger in it. So I put my finger in it for maybe 10 seconds, 20 seconds, pull my finger out, and puts a couple drops in it. It's still clear. My finger had absorbed all the chlorine from that water. You think I bought a water filter? Yeah, the shower filter? You bet. And from then on, I've been conscious that showers and water, when it gets on your body, is literally depositing chlorine. Unless, of course, you listen to, and I used to take the students to our Buffalo City water supplier, which went from the Niagara River through a sand filter into a chlorinated treatment into the faucet. And that's basically the water treatment facility for most cities. Very few cities in the country have tertiary treatments, which means activated charcoal. They expect you to do the activated charcoal part. That's literally what they tell you. And so when I asked him about the chlorine, I said, isn't that a little bit toxic? And he said, oh, well, we expect you to let the water sit for a minute or 5 minutes before you drink it. So now you have the two sides of the story, and this 10,000 times comes right from the organic textbook. If you allow your chlorine radical to get on your skin, it's going to keep creating more radicals until it finds the electrons it's looking for and doesn't need to steal them anymore. So that became the motivation to get a shower filter. And if you do go to Amazon to get anything, including the shower filters, go to smile.amazon.com and please designate Integrity Research Institute as the recipient of the donation. Amazon will donate to us for free. And it don't cost you. And so I'm just emphasizing the fact that the antioxidants do stop free radicals and also help your DNA as well, which has been implicated in aging. So here's the close-up of the cell membrane. We have a description of all the contents of it. This is probably the most amazing insulator in the world. And I say that because as I referred to the transmembrane potential previously, I didn't tell you the voltage. 10 million volts per meter across that cell membrane. And the cell membrane is only a few nanometers in size, but it literally stops that high gradient. If you have 10 million volts across a meter of air, it would short out and you'd have a huge spark. There's very few insulators in the world you can put across that 1 meter distance to stop 10 million volts. And yet your body does it all the time, because it likes storing energy, electrical energy, in your batteries. Every cell membrane literally is a battery, like a capacitor. So this is exciting because it's an understanding of how perhaps when you don't have very much energy, you might want to tune in or plug in to any of these different electrotherapy devices. and thereby give them a benefit. And of course, we have lots of different high voltage ones, which have lots of testimonials. For example, we have a fellow that can literally walk today because he bought one of these. So there's a lot of exciting developments after the audit. Of course, our executive director enjoyed touching the tip of a high voltage generator, and I designed it with an electrostatic net, so you could literally contact the high voltage. Like we have out here, the high voltage generators don't have the insulator to make it safe enough to receive the high voltage directly, and the electrons, of course. And I also designed an electric chair. However, the name was already taken, so I decided to call it an energy chair by popular demand. But I give all the credit to Nikola Tesla. He literally developed the first electric chair until the competition in Edison decided to make it a negative, degenerative reason for using it. But of course, he's lighting a light bulb, which you can do in ours as well, right from the pan. So, an interesting way to get high voltage treatment. And we did move on to the marketing of the osteopad. Years ago, I used to know Robert Becker, and also had heard of Andy Bassett, and then I talked to Arthur Pillow. All three were medical doctors. All three contributed to patents on the bone knitting electrotherapy inventions, all of which were patent for pulse EMFs. And yet, none of them ended up developing the products for market. They only developed it for doctors, got FDA approval for use in doctors' offices. And then this was the 1980s, I'm talking about 70s and 80s. And so 20 years later, I'm talking to Arthur Pillow, why don't you ever market this thing? Obviously, 50% of people today have, osteoporosis. 1 out of 2 people who develop osteoporosis, in 2004. So there's a big demand for this. And Arthur Pillow tells me over the phone, he says, well, we never got funding for it. So this is the kind of mentality that doctors have, and of course professors and researchers also have many times. So we decided to go ahead and do it as well. And we also did receive, Jackie received a patent on the electric antioxidant clothing design, which we also are developing and hopefully licensing as well. And this will be supplying antioxidant microelectrons to the skin with the skin-tight clothing design. And it could be actually something that's very porous, very breathable, that's underneath your clothing. And it's feeding athletes, for example, that might be sweating, and if the athletes perspire, it will increase the electron flow. So it's a very synergistic sports medicine type of product. Another process or project that we've looked into briefly in the past is the nerve deafness project. Dr. Anu Kuharich was a former colleague of mine. I personally visited his lab, and when he passed away, his son literally gave us and donated all his lab notebooks, including a working model of the TD1000. The interesting thing is we did get a donor and a volunteer to help us with the CD project, scanning the entire lab notebooks. But the replication of the TD1000 hasn't been furthered to the part of getting marketing or at least implementation in, say, the various deafness schools. There's schools for the deaf all over the country, and many of those kids or even adults are nerve deaf. And the interesting thing is this patent, 3563246, was designed to literally ramp an audio frequency like from 10 to 10,000 hertz, and then continue to do so over and over again through either audio earphones or even through the jaw, which under a separate patent as well. And it literally cured nerve deafness within a few weeks. So this was a daily treatment for about 20 minutes a day. So I feel that's an important project. This is another project we completed a few years ago, and we're very proud of the fact that we cooperated with the U.S. Psychotronics Association, psychotronics.org is the website, who actually have had very interesting and very, let's say, very emerging or fringe type of inventions dealing with radionics, energy, and consciousness. And so we picked the best papers out of all the conferences they had, even going back to the 1970s, even some patents that were on radionics, for example, and put them into 2 books that are still in print today. And I decided to put the president of the organization on the cover, of course, because we felt he was responsible for the work he did. So our institute pursues the energy research and education with scientific integrity, and we also put on conferences, books, and reports and products. And you can subscribe to our Future Energy e-news on our website homepage for free. And we advocate for the common good without favoritism. And we're also a nonprofit organization that accepts tax-deductible donations. And I've been on some of the TV stations talking about energy situations. And in the energy program area, this is probably the best graph to show the situation we exist in today in the United States. The U.S. literally is looking at the, and this was developed by the U.S. Energy Association in Washington, D.C. a few years ago. And it's probably the best picture of how our electrical grid is operating. The electrical grid, as you might know, is an antiquated dinosaur. People talk about sinking billions of dollars into it. Well, it's the umbilical cord that J.P. Morgan designed when he heard that Nikola Tesla wanted to wirelessly transmit power. He said, how can I put a meter on it? So instead he said, well, we're going to get wires going, so he put meters and collect money. Well, in the process of doing that, he then literally took quadrillion BTUs, and as you go through the conversion process to deliver it to your house, you're down to 1/3 of the electricity that's being generated. In other words, about 33% efficient. So that's really not tolerable anymore when we're really looking at energy efficiency for the future, reversing of our trends in our country and in the world as well. So there's got to be a better method. And of course, Shell always has a better method. They have answers to all these burning questions. So let's see what Shell's doing to solve the energy crisis. And it should pop up perhaps briefly. And if we're lucky and it does, then I can slide it over to you. It's already there. Good. Okay, in a few seconds we should see the website with our video, a short 2-minute video describing the issue. Yes, our internet is a little bit slow, but it's coming up. Energy for the Future is what it's called. Is our volume working okay? Because she's already talking. Okay.
More people added to the planet over the last 40 years. In addition, millions of people are enjoying a better standard of living, so energy demand has shot up, doubling our current rate. At the same time, scientists believe that CO2 emissions will need to be halved to avoid serious climate change. What's shaping that future? Millions of people across the developing world are improving their quality of life. They're buying their first fridge, computer, or car. If we all continue to use energy the way we do today, energy demand by 2050 could rise by even more, perhaps as much as 3 times the current rate. Shell scenario planners think a big gap between energy supply and demand could emerge. That gap will have to be closed, either by demand being forced down, or supply being ramped up, or some mix of both. But just how that will happen is uncertain. So, the world will face a zone of uncertainty. We will have to draw on many different sources of energy to meet our needs. By 2050, 1/3 of the global energy mix could come from renewables. Fossil fuels and nuclear power are likely to make up the rest. The future will also call for greater energy efficiency and more lower CO2 options. How is Shell responding? The challenge is a big one, which the world will have to tackle together. At Shell, we're working with partners to deliver